to pages. And this month has been amazing. We've seen programs and we have remembered people that we had forgotten part of the movement. And this year I remembered my social studies teacher, Rutledge Pearson. I know Rodney remembers him because I saw your names connected. And he was one of the members of the NAACP, and he was the one who got me interested in social studies and social change. So I want to say thank you. I look forward to hearing our speakers this evening, and I appreciate you, all of you, for coming. So thank you and welcome, and let us begin.
We're going to begin with prayer. Let us pray. Spirit of abundance, God of grace, Mother of hope, we pause now to remember those stories that are all around us, but so often passed over. Those stories that, when told, are shared because of what someone is, not who they are. This month, our nation calls it Black History Month. Help us to realize that Black history is all of our histories. May the day come when these stories are so widely taught that no month need be separately divided. We know this day will not come until we as a people make different choices. We pray now for those new choices. May we come to see a day where the prison system becomes redemptive, not punitive. A day where the legal system learns to focus more squarely on the facts and not the colors of our skin. A day where our schools are as well funded as the needs demand. May our role models be allowed to excel when they thrive and not be taken down for their rich heritage. We know this will require a shift in power, and this can be scary. Give those full of fear hope. May we come to know grace so that our hearts will not be hardened to the pain around us. There are so many beautiful stories needing to be told, and we need to get the chance to hear them. Widen our vision so that the history that is shared this month and every month come to be known as our history too. We are most human when we see the humanity in others. Amen.
Amen.
He's got the whole world in his hand. 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 He's got the woods and the waters in his hand. He's got the woods and the waters in his hand. He's got the sun and the moon right in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the birds and the bees right in his hand.
That was a absolutely beautiful rendition. And we have to make note that almost everyone involved in the program today, our singers and the authors that have come to speak, all have a relationship with St. Philip. So it's really nice in Jacksonville. So we absolutely love that. And that was the daughter of Gloria Belton and Ronnie. So now we're here to celebrate some of the local historians in our community. 3 local authors are on our panel today, and I'm going to introduce them with a very short bio. At that point, I will turn it over to them and they will talk a little bit about their book, and we will then open up for questions from our audience. And you can send in questions 2 ways. Either try to put it in a chat directly to me and I can bring it up and read it. Or if you feel that you would like to ask it personally, just simply, I don't have everyone on the screen, so I wouldn't be able to call on you, but I will try to do that if I see that someone has a question, or in the chat response, just state that you have a question that you would like to ask and to whom, and then I can ask you to then present your question, okay? So our first author today is Marcia Dean Felts, and she's a former Duval County Public School librarian, as well as a Florida genealogy librarian with the Jacksonville Public Library System. She's a proud 4th generation First Coast resident and has held several board positions and continues to be actively involved with a number of community and civic organizations. Among her current interests is the Fernandina Beach Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project, which remembering ancestors and honoring the 2 million Africans who died during the transatlantic human trade voyage. Marcia is married to St. Philip's member and official photographer Michael Phelps, who is also has photo credits in the book that we will be discussing today. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, Marcia and Michael enjoyed traveling abroad with their granddaughter, Kayana. Her passion for traveling is currently grounded, but she has become active with the Jacksonville Sister Cities Association, the Nelson Mandela Bay Committee, where she chairs the library project. With the support of local authors, bookstores, and area publishers, the project has donated over 700 books and materials to libraries in 8 sister cities throughout the world. She is a communicant of St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Fernandina Beach and is now a full-time resident of American Beach, the subject of her first book, written in 1997, and the book that she will share with us today, An American Beach for African Americans. In that book, she teased us with some recipes, and her first book has since been written, and her second book was the American Beach Cookbook, and the 75th anniversary edition of the American Beach Book of Homes, the monograph, St. Philip's Episcopal Church, History and Heritage, and Landon Williams, The Boy from Jesse Street, and another book, Soli Mitchell's First 100 Years. And she's completed her first children's book, which is 20 Pieces of Peppermint Candy. Welcome, Marcia. Our next panelist is the retired Lieutenant Colonel Troy Mosley, a Jacksonville native and FAMU graduate who served over 20 years in the U.S. Army in various positions. Troy taught medical support and evacuation at the United States Infantry Center and School in Fort Benning, Georgia, before being selected to attend Baylor University's Master of Health Administration program through the Army's Advanced Civil Schooling program. In 2000, Troy was handpicked by Colonel Elder Granger to complete his administrative residency at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany, the Department of Defense's only tertiary level medical center in Europe. I looked that up. That means that you had specialized care unit, correct? And surgeries. It is important to note that Granger was the first Black commander of Landstuhl and went on to become the first Black physician promoted to two-star general in the history of the U.S. Army. Troy's tour in Germany garnered many notable achievements, which included being the lead project officer for the first ever Fisher House dedicated outside of the continental United States. In 2003, he served as the executive officer for the 212th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. You may be familiar with MASH, right, Troy? The only surgical hospital in theater, and that's in Iraq for the first 96 hours during Operation Iraqi Freedom. And he was responsible for the unit's redeployment, leading the hospital's 3.1 million recovery and refit in a record 60 days. And for all of those military people, they know that that is quite a feat. Troy served as the administrative director, the Department of Surgery at Walter Reed Army Hospital, before being selected to be the Army Surgeon General's Assistant Executive Officer. His tenure at Walter Reed saw the repair of deficiencies noted in the widely publicized 2007 Washington Post article and the successful merger of the Walter Reed Army Medical Center with Bethesda Navy Medical Center, creating the now Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. In 2009, Troy served as the COO for Weed Army Community Hospital, where he led the hospital to the Best Joint Commission accreditation score in the Army that year and helping to secure funds for DOD's first ever new solar-powered $300 million hospital at Fort Irwine, California. Upon retirement from the Army, Troy began working for the Defense Health Agency in Falls Church, Virginia, where he remains employed. In 2018, he initiated a strategic communications campaign to raise public awareness on the need to rename Army bases after Confederate generals. That campaign led him to establish the nonprofit Citizens Against Intolerance organization, whose mission is to push back against all forms of structural inequality. He currently serves as the organization's president and CEO. In 2018, Troy wrote and self-published a book, Unwritten Truths: The Armed Forces and American Social Justice. The book has recently been picked up by Rowman and Littlefield and will be re-released in spring 2021. And our third author, last but certainly not least, and I have to say that Rodney, the background music playing is grooving on a Sunday afternoon. For those who've read your latest book, they will understand that. If not, you're going to explain it. Rodney is an Air Force vet, a proud father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, who just so happens to also be a civil rights activist and historian. His activism started when he was just 16 years old and the president of the Jacksonville Youth Council NAACP, and one of the leaders of the 1960 Jacksonville sit-in demonstrations. He recounts those events along with the Axe Handle Sunday in his first book, It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke. In addition to his involvement in the civil rights movement, Rodney has served 2 four-year terms on the Jacksonville City Council. He is responsible for a number of firsts in the Jacksonville community. He was one of the original 13 national recipients of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Television Fellowships. He was the first Black to co-host a television talk show in Jacksonville on PBS channel WJCT. He was the first Black male hired at the Prudential South Central Home Office in Jacksonville. And he was the first Black to serve as an executive director of the state of Florida's Construction Industry Licensing Board. Mr. Hurst remains active in the Jacksonville community, serving on various boards and speaking on civil rights, Black history, and racism. Both his first book and his second, Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told, have received national recognition and awards. And his latest book, the one we will share today, Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity, is co-authored with Dr. Rudy F. Jameson. is also one of the 5 finalists for the Best Book National Award for General Nonfiction category. He is the recipient of numerous awards and is a Silver Life member of the NAACP. So welcome to all of you. We are thrilled to have you on our panel today.
Welcome.
And to get everyone familiar with your books, we will go in the order that I introduced you all. Tell us a little bit about your book and your inspiration for writing that book. So we'll start with Miss Marcia.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you, St. Philip's and in having this program for us. And thank you for our audience. This is a full house. And I'm just so happy to see all of you. Fond memories flood when I look at your faces and remember our relationship. It took me quite a while to call myself an author, because what I did, I think that the writing and the story, I think that each one of us, as we are in the human race, each one of us is an author, and we all have relevant stories to tell. Now, the first book that I wrote and had published, of course, is An American Beach for African Americans. I don't know if you can see it on this poster, but that book is about as old as Troy. And
I have a copy.
oh, wonderful. And so in writing that book, I didn't start out with the book. I started out with a quest for information. I was a librarian, and I asked some questions when Michael and I first bought our first property on American Beach. It was 1988. And we both are Jacksonville natives, and we had been coming to American Beach our whole lives. And I just happened to have met and fell in love with him at St. Philip's Episcopal Church. But we had been coming to the beach our entire lives, and you know how children are, and eventually we graduate and move on, and we have dreams and wishes and wants. And all I ever wanted was to be able to have a house on American Beach. And I just wished and wanted. But then when I took action, it happened. And when I took action, I wanted to know, well, baby, where did this come from? How did it happen? And so I started asking, and I got a variety of answers, which did not satisfy me because it wasn't exact. I wanted to know when, I wanted to know how much, I wanted to know who all. And so this sent me Jerry Urso. It sent me Jerry's biggest digger I ever knew. But it sent me digging. And my questions were answered. I was so happy. I had 10 pages of information documented. I had 7 pictures that my husband had taken, because you know what you know. Mm-hmm. And I knew in 1990 that there were no pictures that were available from whenever American Beach had been established. Mm-hmm. And so I went to Corrine Brown. You know all of us, and Mildred Sapp, I know you're on there, and you know your role as a librarian. You know, when you have programs, you have people to evaluate it and tell you how you did, right? So I went to Corrine Brown and I said, hey, Corrine, would you find somebody at that college, FCCJ, whatever the college name is, Florida State College of Jacksonville, would you find an English teacher or somebody who could read my work and put some periods here and commas there and get my sentence structure straight? And Corrine went to Alice Grant. and with my 10 pages. And I sent these 10 pages right here. I sent these 10 pages to Alice Grant. And she put the commas in, and she went and inquired about, well, you need to have more detail, blah, blah, blah. But she asked me two things. Now, here I am searching. Got 10 pages. That's all I needed. I knew everything I wanted to know. But she asked me, what was American Beach before it became American Beach? And that threw me. That meant far, Jerry. That meant far more research. But I did have the good sense to go and do that research. And those 10 pages resulted in 200 pages. I sent on 3rd, 1993, a letter to the University Press of Florida. And I said, I have this story, American Beach. Would you publish my book? Blah, blah, blah. And on May 6th, they sent a letter to me saying, send me your manuscript. Now, that talks about being ready. It just so happens that I was ready and sent the manuscript. I am impressed with Troy. When I read his bio and saw the book that he had written, and he was determined that this book is going to be published, whether you publish it or don't publish it. And so Troy published his book, and the book was so good that a publisher wanted to pick it up and publish it. And that's just wonderful. Anything that you dream, anything that you want to do, you can do it. So hitting off of American Beach. Anyhow, so we were having a program, and it was September the 5th, Saturday, 1992. So here's this little paper, 10 pages, 7 pictures that I sent to Alice. I wanted to have information so I could tell you the history of American Beach on that Labor Day program. And when I got the program, I went, oh gosh, keeping it clean. I went, oh gosh, this is a whole lot of information. You know, after Alice had sent me back into research, the program, I gave the information away. Here's your history of American Beach, 1, 2, 3, 4. There it is. But by the time I got through with all that research, y'all know I didn't give nothing away. That book started selling for $25, hardback, then $20 paperback. Okay. Now, as I said, everybody has a story in them. This book came out in 1997. It's still selling. Well, I have another book that I did. This was in 2002 when I retired after 37 years. And it was something that I started collecting in 1965. Troy, you that old?
Not quite.
Well, I started this baby in 1965. I was interning in Miami in the library, and we had programs. You know how we used to have devotionals. I don't know whether people still have devotions, Pam Pierce, in schools or not. But, you know, there were inspirations, scriptures, and thoughts for the day. So in 2002, I gave this book to the Duval County school system, and they published it and put it in all of the schools. And it was 333. I had collected from 1965 to 2002, 330 thoughts for the day. Boom. Now, you know, I couldn't stop. You know, when something's good, you don't give it up. And that's how writing is. You know, you write that first book and you think you're through, but you ain't through. So here today, I have 621 quotations and thoughts for the day. Because though I retired had 333, I went on until, and still doing it, 621 quotations. And I want to say to every one of you, you have a story to tell. And if you appreciate what life has given to you, you must tell your story. This book here, my mama, memories of Eva Cobb, Rosia Lamar. It was just like Dr. Tony Morrison. It was like doing an implant without training to get this story out of my mama. But I have it, and I have her history. I know the things I wanted to know, and so that's how it came about. I started this.
Wait, Miss Marsha, I'm gonna, because we want to leave time for the audience to ask some more questions.
You should have put them yellow cards up.
Yes, ma'am, you are absolutely right. I should have. I'm gonna. I know, and that's why I said I can't wait till we can do this live, and we will have that time to do. But unfortunately, Zoom kind of limits us. But I'm glad that you kind of threw the ball to Troy, and he is our next. And I have to say that the introduction in Troy's book is written by General Honoré. And is everyone familiar with that name?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he has now been tasked to do the investigation behind the insurrection on the 6th of January. So that's kind of a pat on your back as well, Troy. But just give us briefly a little introduction into your book. And it's really great because a lot of people are not familiar with military life. But there's so many things that you talk about in your book that really impact us socially as well. So, all right, Mr. Troy.
First off, I want to thank the Episcopal Church women for the opportunity to share this platform with two very accomplished authors and a dynamic historian. I am deeply honored to be in your presence today. St. Philip's Episcopal Church is my home church, as it is Miss Angela, formerly Dean, who gave us that beautiful rendition of He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. My book is entitled Unwritten Truths, the Armed Forces and American Social Justice. And I guess many of you all may be wondering what the armed forces has to do with Black American struggle for freedom and equality. I begin my story by focusing on this struggle, and in the book, I expand this struggle to examine how other marginalized segments of the American diaspora have evolved to fight for full inclusion, as told through the lens of military service. My story begins with my father, Joshua Mosley Jr. My dad was a Medical Service Corps officer in the Army during Vietnam, as I was a Medical Service Corps officer during America's war against terrorism. My father's service to America opened many doors for our family that otherwise would have remained closed. And I understood this from a very young age. None of the things that I or my sister enjoyed as children growing up in Jacksonville, Florida would have been remotely possible but for this history. And I wanted to share that experience with the readership. This understanding of how the civil rights movement, the intersection of education and hard work influenced my life, compelled me to learn more about the American civil rights struggle and about history in general. My father grew up in the shadows of one of America's premier historically Black colleges and universities, Florida A&M University. He grew up in a small town about 60 miles outside of Tallahassee, Monticello, Florida. His mother and 8 brothers and sisters were sharecroppers. My paternal grandmother had an 8th grade education, but she made sure that her children took advantage of the opportunities available to them. My father graduated from Florida A&M University with a bachelor's degree in biology. One of his older brothers, Julius Mosley, became a dentist. His younger brother became a pharmacist. My Aunt Mady, who is with us today, holds a PhD in education. And she understood the importance of education, and she made sure that her children took advantage of the opportunities available to them, and that village that nourished their brilliance and their potential launched them into the world so that they could achieve in ways that their parents could not. My father served 6 years on active duty before being recruited into Southern Bell's management training program. In the 1970s, America's Fortune 500 companies were under court-ordered mandates to diversify their workforce. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 was pushback against employment discrimination, which was rampant and legal in the United States. These companies turned to the military, who had more college-educated people than any other employer, because they began desegregating 30 years prior in the 1940s. Men in uniform were at the forefront of America's struggle with racism. During World War II, within the Black community, this was known as the double V: victory abroad against fascism and victory at home against racism. While I was stationed in Germany, I discovered this rich tradition quite by accident. I was planning a Black History Month celebration similar to the one we are engrossed in today, and I stumbled upon monuments. The continent of Europe is filled with monuments dedicated to the heroism and sacrifice of these Black men and women who participated in the liberation of Europe during both world wars. These men and women of that era hoped that their deeds would soften America's heart and increase its appetite for equality. Their hopes were dashed when they returned home to be confronted by virulently racist segregationists who used lynchings, violence, and other forms of intimidation to convey that there would be no changes in American society as a result of their sacrifices abroad. There was a tradition of strong Black civic leaders, men like A. Philip Randolph and William Henry Hastie, who insisted that if Black dollars were good enough to build planes, tanks, and ships for the American war effort, that Black men were good enough to drive those tanks, fly those planes, and sail those ships. President Truman felt that external pressure from the Black community, and in response to the atrocities and that pressure, he desegregated the armed forces in 1948 through executive order. That was the first pushback against structural segregation and inequality in America. On January 6th of 2021, we witnessed an unimaginable attack on our nation's capital. Men and women who feared they were losing their country showed us that some Americans, would rather destroy our democracy than to share equally in its promise. These men and women were attempting to preserve what I describe in my book as America's unwritten truce. This was a deal brokered between the Union and the Confederate States following the war. This unwritten truce maintains that the South could no longer enslave Black Americans, and that the North would more or less leave Southerners to do as they saw fit with the former enslaved Africans and their descendants. This deal was struck in exchange for Southern delegates casting their electoral college votes for Rutherford B. Hayes in the contested 1876 presidential election. In exchange for these votes, Hayes promised to bring Reconstruction to an end, and he did. It is important to note that the former Confederate states never rescinded their specified belief in white supremacy. They simply transformed their ideology for governance into a counterinsurgency designed to subvert the rights of Black Americans and make us a permanent underclass. And so I say to this day, Black Americans and America's struggle for equality continues.
Very good, thank you. Which parlays us over to Rodney, because his latest book is a discussion between someone himself going through, actively involved in the civil rights movement, and a child of our age, Troy, who sees things maybe a little differently. And so, Rodney, give us your inspiration for writing that book, which just came out in 2020. So there's a lot that's very relevant for now in that as well. And so bring us up to date with you and yours.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Troy. Thank you, my good friend Marsha, who was in part responsible for my writing my first book. But I've written 3 books. The first book was It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, and it's about the 1960 sit-in demonstrations in Jacksonville and Axe Handle Saturday, and a part of the civil rights history of Jacksonville that was blacked out or whited out, as I like to say, by the white press in Jacksonville, both the television stations and the Florida Times-Union. They covered nothing about what happened in those 2 weeks and afterwards in downtown Jacksonville during that summer, when mostly high school students sat in at the lunch counters in downtown Jacksonville. And after sitting in for 2 weeks, we were attacked by 200 whites with axe handles and baseball bats. That the city of Jacksonville's administration, the mayor Hayden Burns and others, knew was going to happen because that the Klan had had a meeting in a local downtown hotel in Jacksonville to plan a race war. So I talk about the social, political, and the civic racism of Jacksonville during that time, and these various stores in downtown Jacksonville who were insulting the Black shoppers, who wanted those shoppers to come in and only shop where they wanted them to shop. But after spending your money in the store, then they had no feel for your going over to that white vestige of segregation, that white comfort level called a white lunch counter for Blacks to sit. We said that was insulting, and we used those white lunch counters to show our opposition both to white privilege, white racism, thus the name of my book, which initially was going to be called Axe Handle Saturday, but when I got ready to send my paperwork into the Library of Congress, I changed the name from Axe Handle Saturday to It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, because we did not sit in at lunch counters just to eat a sandwich and to drink a beverage. It was because of our Black human dignity and respect, and showing our opposition to white American racism at the time. As I would travel throughout the South, principally the state of Florida, and talk about my book at various book festivals, a lot of persons would ask about Black history. I always talked about the revered Black history, the revered civil rights history of Jacksonville. So my second book, Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told, deals with the great legacy of Blacks in Jacksonville, Blacks who were in positions that no one had seen Blacks in before, starting with James Weldon Johnson and A. Philip Randolph and Bob Hayes and Johnetta Betch Cole and Ronnie Belton and Clanzell Brown and Arne Gerardo, those persons who made a difference, impacted not only the city and the state, but also the country. And I also included in that book other anecdotes about my involvement in getting Nathan Bedford Forrest's school change from Nathan Bedford Forrest, this founder of the Ku Klux Klan, and this first imperial wizard of the Klan, and this slave trader, school named in 1959 by a white racist Duval County School Board as their answer to the Brown decision. Also, I deal with when I was a member of St. Philip's with my mother, how a very prominent member of St. Philip's at that time said to my mother, because of the sit-ins, because we were boycotting downtown, because we were picketing downtown. This very prominent Black person and this lawyer said to my mother in louder than a conversational tone, "Janelle, you need to do something about that boy. He's making it bad for all of us." Because the Black community, it was not then, is not now monolithic. So when you understand the great legacy of Black folk, when you understand that Black folk have to confront racism, doing nothing is not an option. All of us are not, but some of us will. And all of that started for me at age 11 in Mr. Pearson's American history class, and the following year in his civics class. That started my road to Black history and American history and civil rights history. And I joined the Youth Council NAACP when I was 11. I became president when I was 15, led the sit-ins at 16. My last book, Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations about Racism and Identity Development. And I asked Dr. Rudy Jameson of the University of North Florida to co-author the book because I wanted conversations and a look at white American racism through my eyes as a 75-year-old and through Rudy's eyes as a 50-year-old. And we went through different subject areas talking about racism, this uncomfortable subject that Black folk and white folk don't like to discuss, that white folk don't want to hear Black folk telling them how they took advantage of us for their financial, social, and political gain, and how Black folk don't want to be reminded of the fact that we were taken advantage of for white folks' financial, political, and social gain. So we talk about racism. We talk about racism in religion. We talk about how this country was founded on a racist Christian ideal. And to get around adhering to the biblical teachings and the teachings of Jesus Christ in the Bible, white America, white Christian America, considered us chattel or property. And that every religious denomination in this country owns slaves. Yet American history likes to teach, I call American history incomplete, dishonest, and racist, because it is, and because we don't teach American history the way it should be taught. We don't teach the truth. So this is the book on racism and deals with those issues, and of course, a number of the anecdotes that are involved in that. The important thing is that young Black students have to be able to pick up a book. In the educational arena, there is a slogan, unwritten or otherwise, that if it's not written down, it did not happen. Black students cannot go into a classroom and pick up and read about the contributions made by those who look like them. Their white counterparts can. And that is ridiculous. That is evil, and it's vile, and it's insidious that all of a sudden white folk did everything in this country, Black folk did nothing. So all three books deals with the legacy of Black history and civil rights history, and the last book in particular deals with racism.
Very good. Thank you very much. We will open it up to questions from our audience. And again, just a little reminder that when you are not speaking, to put your computer or phone on mute so that we're not getting background noise, number one. Number two, you can either raise your hand and I will recognize you. I don't see everyone on my screen, or send in the question on a chat and I can kick it back to you to ask your question. But discussing racism is a common theme in all three of your books, and really, it's kind of hard, isn't it, to kind of get around the idea of race and race relations between whites and blacks. Even in the American Beach, Marcia, you note that after property had been sold and the resort went up next door, that when they built their stuff, immediately adjacent to American Beach, they put all of their industrial equipment, their air conditioning and their piping and plumbing, and did nothing to try to conceal that. Yet, when they developed another community on the other side, they are completely hidden with lush and brush, and you can't see. So there tends to be kind of a disregard for the worth, maybe, of what our sacred spaces mean, not only to us, but the value that they give to American society as a whole. So hold that, Miss Marcia. And then, Troy, we talk about, the advancement of Black officers in the military. So again, I think you leave off with the idea that there's still work to be done in the military. How do you get that work done without the non-Blacks or someone thinking that you are decreasing the value of the leadership skills? Or they somehow think that if you promote more ethnic folks, that somehow the experience or the value that they're given is a little less, except for those generals that we have seen, the onesie twosies coming out. And then you all can piggyback off of each other. And so, Rodney, it comes to, you have a quote in your book from Dr. Cornel West, who states, a fully functional, multiracial society cannot be achieved without a sense of history and open, honest dialogue. How do you all do that in your social setting, Marcia, in the military, and then maybe politically, Rodney?
Put that quote in my first book before I stopped being a fan of Dr. Cornel West. But
I know.
That's another story. One of the things that we refuse to do in this country, we refuse to not only deal with racism, but we deify whites in American history. I say that Black folk in this country, like white folk in this country, are served a bland and tasteless entree called baby food, and they rename it American history. And they sell us on anything in American history, and it's not the truth. How in the world, and no one can answer this for me, why do we still celebrate the discoverer of America as Christopher Columbus when he never set foot in the continental United States? But that's the lying about history. I've got a good friend, Dr. James Lowen, white sociologist, historian retired, who wrote a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. Everything your American history textbook got wrong. We can no longer afford to not talk about some of those subjects that make us uncomfortable. But what has happened is that Black folk and white folk have developed a comfort speak. We don't like to say things that make each other uncomfortable, because if I keep talking about uncomfortable things, then maybe I'm not invited the next time they go to see a Jaguars game, or the next time they go on a picnic or go out to eat. So if I'm continually talking about racism and he's always or she's always bringing that up, and that's our problem in this country right now. Our young Black students are educational cripples, because in the classroom, they know nothing about themselves. And we don't do it in the churches. We don't talk about Black history in the family. We don't talk about Black history in our fraternities and our sororities. When do we stop that? When do we start talking about it?
But when
And
did we stop? Because I don't know about you, Troy, but growing up, our parents did that. And I feel like it's my generation who has kind of dropped the ball on that. I think
But
that,
Wendy, it is not taught in the school system. It's not
well,
taught in
that's true, but
and in colleges and universities,
yeah,
including
unless it's a special course.
Yeah.
You know, there's a quote from, I believe, Clarence Page, who said this during the O.J. Simpson trial. Race and racism is the one thing that you can't get Black people to stop talking about. And by contrast, you can't get white people to talk about it. And I agree with Rodney in that history is so very, very, very important. The system is designed to oppress and suppress the talents of Black people. And for me, it goes back to the notion of white supremacy. White supremacy is the root of America's original sin. As Rodney stated, you could not maintain the institution of slavery and hold yourself out to be a moral being without categorizing the enslaved Africans as less than human. So, in my opinion, America, if we are serious about eroding structural inequality, we have to take a sledgehammer to the notion of white supremacy. I remember the first time I learned about the American Civil War, I was 7 years old in an airport running around, and I put on a Confederate patrol cap. And my mother snatched it off of my head and sat me down and gave me a book. She didn't yell at me.
Right.
I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I had broached some very sacred trust. And when I got home, I read in an encyclopedia about the American Civil War. And that was the first time that I learned that Black Americans were enslaved in this country. I felt an immediate sense of shame. My only reference to slavery at that point was the Ten Commandments movie about Charlton Heston and the escape of the Jewish people from Israel. No one had to explain to me anything else, but I felt the shame that is conveyed with that part of history, that misinformation. And so, yes, history is very important for our young people to understand that we were not slaves, we were enslaved. They enslaved builders and architects and farmers and physicians. And that's something that is very powerful for a child, learning to read and grow and know their history and feel like they can do anything imaginable.
And I wanted to add something on racism in this community, racism in American Beach, throughout Nassau County. We've made some changes, but the more things change, the more they remain the same. And just as we, because of racism, were forced to find our own, we now are facing methods and means of gentrification, takeover, erasure, and moving us out of the community. On any given day that you would come to this once all Black community, you would see the change that is taking place right before your very eyes. And it won't be too long before that name American Beach will be like other communities we knew, other communities where we thrive, other communities where we live. The people who are coming in now are not calling it or coming in on American Beach. We had 200 acres of this community, oceanfront. And when it was sold in 1985, half of it was gone in one sale.
Mm.
When that's 1985. So I'm gonna fast forward to about 2000, when the senior citizen community came in, when the Osprey Village came to American Beach. They purchased that property on that 100 sold acres that was sold in 85. And they would be doing construction and doing different things, different development. And we went to complain about, well, you're not doing it according to the codes that are in place in this community. Well, guess what? The 100 acres that Osprey Village now possessed, it was no longer American Beach.
Mm.
It's no longer in the American Beach tract. So here you have 100 acres instead of 200 in that tract. At our gateway, there is a convenience store, been there since 1972. But across from it, there's the fire station, wonderful addition. Also a restaurant that had been there for years, different owners, different names. But just, I'm gonna say 3 years ago, if that long, a different owner came in. And when you see advertisements, it's sort of like they have a wall, the invisible wall, and there is no wall or no gate, but you know that this is not American Beach. You know that you are not wanted. Their advertisements state that we're between this resort and we're between that resort, but here you are at the gateway of American Beach. And we have a lot of development going on, zoning change, commissioners not voting in the interest. We have been struggling, battling, and fighting for the right to the Atlantic Ocean. And guess what? It's a gate on the ocean.
Oh yeah, on the beach, so you can't
A
walk
gate
to the resort.
on the ocean at the Evans Rendezvous ramp, and only good old boys with the good old boy trucks can go there. You got to be a resident of Nassau County to come down in our ocean front. But racism here is as bad as it was when we were forced to buy our own and get our own beach. So Florida has this huge coastline, longest coastline in the United States for a state between the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. We could not go to the beaches then, and now we're being, Ronnie Belton, we're being eradicated from no bonfire, you used to do that, no overnight camping on the beach, and it's awful. It's bad what is happening to our community. Racism just as prevalent as ever.
Let me add a couple of things real quick. Troy talked about the Civil War. We have teachers in our school system who calls it the war between the North and the South. There was no war between the North and the South.
Or the Northern aggression.
It was, and Northern aggression. It was the war between the United States of America and the Confederacy, which was an enemy government that sought to overthrow the United States of America. And had it not been for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson becoming president, all Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee and all the soldiers and the cabinet and the generals would have been tried for sedition, anarchy, and treason. And they were not. But it also goes into religion. Real quick. We say the Middle East. The Middle East is not a geographical term. The Middle East is a political term. Because if you didn't say the Middle East, and most students can't tell you, most adults can't tell you
Which countries comprise the
where the
Middle
Middle
East?
East is. But the Middle East is in and around the continent of Africa. So just understand that when we say, well, the Holy Land and the Bible takes place in the Middle Land, no, the Holy Lands and the Bible takes place in and around the continent of Africa. Nobody wants to say that. White folk don't want to say that. They don't want to teach black folk that. For the Christian scholars online, when the angel Gabriel went to Joseph in a dream or vision, depending upon what you believe, and told him to take Jesus and Mary to Egypt and hide there, stay there until I send for you. Let's make it very clear. You cannot hide a white, blue-eyed baby in the country of Egypt on the continent of Africa.
No, sir.
We don't talk about that either.
That is very true. And in talking, and this really is about the important conversations that we all need to have. Not only that, what our children are currently going through, it's totally different than what we went through, than what you all have gone to, our older audience members as well. So that's also a conversation to have, because if you notice with the movements, there is a bit of a difference in the tone, right? The anger that our youth are kind of bringing to the table. But what does it look like? Because now, is it a little more acceptable to demonstrate or to talk about, because there seems to be buy-in from others or the non-Blacks? You know, are we now able to discuss diversity and inclusion a little more? And then what does that really look like?
No, we're not able to talk about diversity and inclusion more so than we have. It's a lot of very specious talk and conversation. Whites who call themselves progressive and who say they're allies of black folk in this fight, they're only allies up to a point.
Uh-huh.
Their social conscience is only pricked just a bit. Then when there are circumstances that gets to be confrontational, then they say, oh no, you all shouldn't do that. The civil rights movement has not changed. The same civil rights movement that we were involved in the 50s and 60s, it's the same civil rights movement today. Black folk fighting against racism. The 50s and 60s was the same ones that Thurgood Marshall and John Hamilton Houston were involved in before that. The bottom line is black folk fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the guarantees both in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. But yet there's always a but. Well, yeah, we think you all should have your citizenship and your freedoms, but until we remove that but, until white folk internalize their own white privilege and their own racism, then I will believe they are progressive allies when I see it. Right now, I don't believe it.
Wendy?
Because you're working, Troy, to help change the names of some, bases, military bases named after Confederate soldiers. Does it look like it's a little easier to kind of broach that subject than before? Oh, you're on mute, Troy.
It's very interesting, a very complex dynamic. As Rodney said earlier, the Black community is not monolithic, and there is a generational shift. My own children are of adult age now. My oldest, Allie's 28. My son, Niall, is 23, and his generation is at a point where, they are so frustrated that we've been fighting this struggle for so long, they don't have the patience to explain anything. I'm more pragmatic. As Dr. King said, we may all have come here in different ships, but we're in the same boat now. So if I think someone's heart is in the right place and they truly want to understand about the Black experience and about racism, I will take the time to convey what I believe, what my thoughts are, because racism in America is not a problem that the Black community can fix in and of ourselves.
No, we can't.
You know, it is a problem that will require white Americans to put their shoulder to the wheel as well, as they have done in the past.
Right.
With the civil rights movement. I think it was the images of Black people being abused that were piped into the living rooms of white Americans that made them engage with their congressmen and say, we are better than this as Americans, and we must allow Black Americans the same basic freedoms that we enjoy, to vote, to not be discriminated against. Now, I'm not Pollyanna-ish enough to say that we have true equality, because clearly we don't. It was in the racial reckoning of this summer that Congress found the will to change something structurally in our landscape that spoke to white supremacy. And that was the name of 12 US funded Army bases named for men who at the height of their malfeasance committed treason against this country. And it was only in that moment that Congress found a bipartisan will to pass laws saying that DOD had 3 years to make the change. So that is progress. We will have to continue to keep our foot on the gas because, as we know, the system seeks to preserve itself. They will want to change Fort Benning, Georgia, who was named for a former KKK member and federal judge, to Fort Columbus, Georgia. And that is not sufficient because they could have made that change decades ago. These bases need to reflect the diversity and the contributions of all Americans who sacrificed to make our country what it is.
Any parting words? Are there any questions from our audience? Let me see, I have one coming here. So, okay. If not.
I have a question for Troy.
Okay.
Troy, as a father of a son who is an officer in the military, what advice can you give for the advancement and the potential for advancement for people of color in the military? What have you seen in your experience that is similar or different from the general officers or people who are advanced in the general public?
That's a great question. I would say to your son, get not only a mentor, but get 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Find people who are doing what you've done that are 10, 15, 5, 20 years ahead of you, and ask them, what are the keys to success? How did they get to be where they are? No one does anything by themselves. I mean, we know the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. And that is one thing that I say is mandatory, is that they have to reach out to people who have already walked the walk and introduce himself to say, I am, Lieutenant Captain Major Pierce, and here's some of the things that I want to do. And to have people advocating for him, because a lot of times things are said when you're not in the room, and it's good to have people who know you that can advocate for you.
Very good advice. Any other questions? And we could go on and on. This has been very interesting. We do have some more on our program, but I would like to give each of you just kind of a final word. If your book is still available, give us that information on where we can buy it. I must say thank you to the Belton family for their library, but I will have to return them and to Mrs. Mosley. So I, of course, am interested because I really have thoroughly enjoyed going through, and now I need to really delve into them in deep. I really recommend that everyone, sometimes you just need books to kind of spur or spark that little interest in you, whether or not, like Marcia is encouraging, there is a story in all of us. And sometimes reading other people's stories gives us that idea of what is valuable to other people. And so let's share as often as we can. And a lot of times uplifting our community is kept in our community, and that's unfortunate. And so the next time we do this, we're going to invite even others because we are part of the family. We are cheerleaders for each other. And the only way to bring about real change and talk about what's going on with us and race relations and society is to also talk to those people that we ordinarily would not talk to. And so I thank all of you all for sharing your stories. I will give you a minute to sum up, just give us a little morsel to take with us to go into our week with. Let us know where we can purchase your book. We can also put that up on our website. And at that point, I will come back and we have a history lesson for Mr. Jerry Urso. So I am first going to go to Miss Marcia.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And I want to thank you all for the continuous support and love that you have bestowed upon me. I want to thank you for allowing me to do the history of St. Philip's Episcopal Church. And there's one more thing that I must do for it. We had a grant from the state of Florida, and I had told some stories of some of our founding members that we perhaps may not know about. And because it had nothing to do with the structure of the church, the state asked, just had me not to put it in. But through the years, like the church book was put out in 2003. And so over the years, it has just been tugging at me. I want to talk about some of these people that we don't know, like Daniel McGinnis and Mr. Garvin and Captain Floyd. I wanted to do more about them. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that in. Just as in Rodney's story, if you don't tell it, it won't be told. Oh, you don't have any history if you have not written it down. And so that's what I want to do for St. Philip's and for the people that made the church what it is. And it's just wonderful to see with the pandemic, you still churching, and the evangelism that's going on with Mother Joanne and Father Ford and people who come in and help us. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Troy?
Sure. I think you did a fabulous job of moderating, Wendy. Well,
thank you.
My book is Unwritten Truths, The Armed Forces and American Social Justice. As you stated, it's being re-released by Roman and Littlefield. You can find it at unwrittentruths.com. I guess what I would say is that I'm encouraged by the 83 million Americans who voted for a change. Our country is in the midst of a cold civil war, if you will, over the American identity and what it means to be an American. And we need to educate people to understand that all Americans have contributed to its greatness, that race is a social construct, and that we are 99.9 some percent more alike across all races. And within our commonality and our humanity is where we find the willingness to love each other and to support one another and to advance as a nation that we all can be proud of, where the color of our skin, our gender or sexual orientation doesn't matter and does not limit our potential. So I'm encouraged by that. And I was very honored to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. We're honored to have you. Okay, Mr. Rodney, give us your soundtrack for your ending. And as soon as you finish, we will have a selection. And then, Mr. Urso, I'm going to introduce you and for your presentation, okay? What's our play out song, Rodney? Did you tell them what the importance of the songs were?
No, I did not. In my last book, Never Forget Who You Are, Rudy and I both have songs for you to listen to. Most of mine are old school civil rights songs. Rudy is a little bit more contemporary, but just to get you in the mood for listening or music gets you in the mood for anything, but it also gets you in the mood for reading because some of the comments in talking about racism is not for the faint of heart. So at least you get a chance to get some recommendations. I'd like to thank the ECW and St. Philip's and my friends both at St. Philip's and St. Gabriel's, and you, Wendy, for coordinating what we've been able to do. Racism impacts our very lives. There is no part of what we do that is not impacted by racism. Both of my books, my first two books, are available through Amazon, both Kindle books and hard copy and soft copy. The last book, Never Forget Who You Are, the hard copy is available through Canon with one N, Canon, C-A-N-O-N Press Group, canonpressgroup.com. But the ebook, the Kindle book and the Apple book are also available online. We have seen in this country how racism elected a president who was as racist as they come. We have also seen how the white Christian evangelical community endorsed and supported him, including, unfortunately, some of Christians here, including those from the Episcopal Church, who endorsed and supported Donald Trump and showed up at some of his rallies. My point in saying that is, you don't support a racist today and tell me you are not racist tomorrow. If you support a racist, you are racist. There is no getting away from that, and we need to understand that, and we need to stop playing games that we can ignore it. Racism is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and we need to start calling that out, and we need to start talking about it, and we don't need to walk around like we're walking on eggshells. We need to let those white folk who are racist, who are in the church, who call themselves Christian, understand that we know you're racist. And then until you admit it, then we can't do anything. Black folk can only fight racism, just like Troy said, white folk can change racism. But with more conversations like this, maybe we'll get some folk, at least not much, but maybe we'll get a few folk to understand and make some decisions because it is the right thing to do, not because it's politically expedient.
Very good. Well, we have certainly enjoyed having you all. The panel has been wonderful. I'm hoping that the conversations continue at some point. I can't wait to do this live when we're able to get back together safely. Until then, again, I encourage everyone to get all of the books. And especially now, Marcia has the recipes in a separate book, but there's some listed in her An American Beach for African Americans as well, which are delicious. We are going to have a musical selection, and then thanks to Marsha Dean Phelps, she has introduced someone else to us, Jerry Urso, who has a history presentation for us. But now we are going to enjoy music by Lavinia. Yes? Excellent. All right.
There's no pain Jesus can't feel. There is no hurt
That is beautiful. I know everyone just absolutely enjoys whenever Lavinia sings, but and an absolutely appropriate song for us as well. Two wonderful singers today. And that is a reminder that the battle is not ours alone. The Lord is absolutely with us, and we fight through the racial tensions and everything else with the Lord on our side. So I think with that being said, Miss Marcia, thank you very much for introducing Jerry Urso to us, who has found some very interesting information. He has a short slide or PowerPoint presentation, is that right? He is also a fellow author, a Jacksonville resident, and a historian. And he has found some very interesting things that connects to St. Philip's, right, Mr. Urso? Uh-oh, you're
Okay,
muted.
here we go.
There we go.
So first, I'd like to congratulate you on your program, and we extend you greetings from the Most Worshipful Union Grand Lodge of Florida, where the Honorable Jeffrey G. Jones currently serves as the 19th Most Worshipful Grand Master. We also have I'm a past master of Solly Mitchell Lodge 377, and we have Worshipful Jarrett Hayes also on the call. So I just want to make sure we mention him. We actually wanted to do this program in person. And present these pictures to the church. So hopefully when COVID is over, that we'll be able to bring you what has been lost from your church.
Because that's what we're hoping, is that there is a live presentation at a later date.
Okay. So can she make me a co-host so I can
Mr.
put up a
Ruglia,
slideshow?
can you make him a co-host? Or is it Lavinia who?
It's done.
Okay. So we have a symbiotic relationship going back to the 1870s between the Masons and St. Philip's Episcopal Church. Let me pull the slideshow up. Okay. So the Honorable Joseph Robert Love was our first Grand Master. He was born in the Bahamas on the 2nd of October in 1839. He is the first African American to graduate with a medical degree from the University of Buffalo, and he became a curate at the Episcopal Church located in Jacksonville. While residing in Jacksonville, he was the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Sovereign Grand Lodge from 1870 to 1872, and then following his transfer, he became the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia from 1872 to 1876. He also became the first pastor of St. Philip's Episcopal Church. He was known as the apostle of Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and his Marcus Garvey's inspiration. He opened the doors of his classroom on Ocean Street in 1869, and the footprint of that building is the former public library. He was employed as a teacher at a private school located on the intersection of Adams and Catherine Street. And he started off as a custodian, then administrator, and then under Bishop Young, he became a priest. So while his writing in Georgia and Florida, his writings actually rocked the foundation of the white Christian church. From his eulogy, it was stated, on a wilder field of service, such he would found in England, Dr. Love would have been better understood and more appreciated. Many out here in Jamaica regard him as merely a political agitator and would have been clearly seen of what he really was, a stout-hearted radical, at times impetuous, at times rash, but honest, as well as able, courageous, and the enemy of injustice and shame. On his tombstone, the St. Andrew's Parish Churchyard, it summed up his life with the words, the journalist, the author, the patriot, whom loved justice. He was also the first African-American ever to preach at Trinity Church in New York. Trinity Church is one of the oldest churches in the country, where George Washington used to worship during the encampment during the Revolutionary War. And one of the news articles stated from the Savannah Daily Record in January 23rd, 1876, even at Trinity Church, New York City, Love's appearance created somewhat of a sensation. Just as he returned to Jacksonville in December, Bishop Young dismissed him from the Diocese of Florida and transferred the preacher to Savannah. Rumors of moral lapse seemed to follow Lodge, but other issues likely factored here, quote unquote racism. Rumors of his I'm sorry. So beyond Young's temerity for ordaining a black man as a priest, the young teacher had been circulating quietly to enroll area black men into secret Masonic lodges. This was a harbinger and an early example of Love's future radicalism. It fit perfectly into the heady atmosphere of Reconstruction era Jacksonville. And that is a portrait of Dr. Love that we are going to have framed and present to you. This is from the University of Buffalo, where he is honored on the wall as the first African American to graduate. This is from the Gleaner, which is a Jamaican newspaper of which he was the author. And you can see on the bottom right hand corner, which is the born fighter, the story of Dr. J.R. Love. I think Rodney will really like this. This was his first book, The Indictment, the Testimony, and the Verdict, or Proofs that Romanism is not Christianity. So when he wrote this book, it was earth-shattering to what we would call the white evangelical movement. His second book, St. Peter, the True Position of the Church. And that's a copy from the Savannah Daily Record. So Dr. Love was actually the founder of Pan-Africanism. He's probably one of the most important members of the Jacksonville's La Villa community that no one's ever heard of, or has been lost to history. Just the fact that he was asked to preach at Trinity Church is just a statement to whom he was. And it was his belief to ask African-American men to join these Masonic lodges for the simple fact, how do you get a Baptist, a Methodist, an Episcopal, and a Presbyterian all together at the same time? And it was through Masonic lodges, because this was the way they communicated. They didn't have Facebook, they didn't have Twitter. So this is how African-Americans organized the civil rights movement in Jacksonville, starting at the end of the Civil War. I'd like to add also, this is the title of my upcoming book, The Swashbuckling Adventures of Captain James Wendell Floyd, whom I asked Marcia to assist me and co-author with me. And if you see on the left, that is President Warren G. Harding, and to his right is Captain Floyd. And then in that portrait is we're going to donate to your church in the center of Captain Floyd. And then to the right is a picture of his boat called the Dauntless, where he was one of the first African-American sea captains who outmaneuvered the customs service in bringing munitions to the Cubans during Cuba Libre. And when he passed away at the funeral at St. Philip's Church, his coffin was draped with the Cuban flag. The president of the Republic of Cuba personally came to give remarks, and his tombstone at Evergreen Cemetery, the stone was actually donated by the Cuban government. And there's more. This is the other captain of the same boat was Dynamite Johnny O'Brien, who has his own book, and that is the actual stone that's at Evergreen Cemetery. And there's a lot of information in that book about Captain Floyd and his bravery and how he outmaneuvered and tricked the customs service by hiding the munitions that he was bringing to Cuba. And this is a copy of the wedding invitation that was given to Eartha White on the marriage of his daughter to John Rosamond Johnson. And this was an international affair, as they were married in London, England, at this great yes, I'm sorry. But that was created a great sensation that this wedding was like a royal wedding, to have someone from Jacksonville, and a member of St. Philip's Church daughter, marry John Rosamond Johnson. And at Westminster Abbey in London, England, is where they exchanged their vows. And the first picture is Nora E. Floyd, who was a member of your church. The second is his second wife, Addie Waits Hunton, who was one of the most important African-American attorneys during the Civil Rights Movement. So when they married and later subsequently divorced, it was as big a society issue as Kanye West and the Kardashians. It
That's a
was
bad name.
plastered all over the newspapers because she refused to divorce him but would never visit him. And so her reputation was severely tarnished by her treatment of Captain Floyd in the elder years of his life. And then finally is the picture of his stone again at Evergreen Cemetery. And these are the letters of Captain Floyd and his exchange with W.E.B. Du Bois. And I'll make sure I get these copies to the church. And I want to make sure I get Rodney a copy of his book that I have on PDF that he wrote. So this is our presentation.
Okay, so there's the check, Ron. Thank you.
Yes. So I have PDFs of both of his books. And, you know, one of the things is these two men were probably as prominent as any African-American in the country during their lifetime. It's just that they have been lost to history, especially on the international level, because Dr. Love is revered in Haiti, Bahamas, and Bermuda, and Jamaica, the same way we revere Dr. Martin Luther King. There are statues to Dr. Love throughout the Caribbean, and Captain Floyd was probably one of the most fascinating people. There's many articles in Crisis Magazine and all the newspapers who documented his life and legacy as a swashbuckling sea captain. So with Marsha's help, we are definitely going to make sure that story comes to life. And I thank you.
Because as Rodney has said, if we don't tell our story, no one else will do it. That is amazing.
It is. That's great.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That is very special during this time. So, and we have to continue telling those stories. So this brings us almost to the end. We are going to hear from our chairperson, who had the brilliant idea of having a panel of beloved local authors and historians. And so thank you all for allowing me to share this time with you. And I turn it over to Terry Mosley.
Greetings on behalf of St. Philip's Episcopal Church and the ECW's Black History Committee. I wish to thank each and every one of you for attending. When our ECW president asked for a volunteer, I volunteered without hesitation. But no sooner had I volunteered than I realized that this could not be business as usual. We would not be able to gather in the fellowship hall and greet each other with handshakes and hugs. We would not be able to partake of our delicious, celebratory Caribbean and Southern soul food. I also knew in that moment that because of the gravity of the situation in our nation, we could not forego the commemoration of Black History Month. We could not be dispirited or deterred by the pandemic or those determined to roll back our progress by any means necessary. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, said over 100 years ago, and I quote, "The oppressor has always indoctrinated the weak with the interpretations of the crimes of the strong." Let that sink in. How prophetic. Today we celebrated Black history. And while we did not have our traditional feast, Marcia, Troy, and Rodney brought us blessings and gave us food for thought. Their engaging commentaries and reflections give us a lot to chew on and digest long after we leave here. Now, if the spoken words were the entrees, the music served as appetizer and desserts. We were delighted by our songbirds, Angela and Lavinia.
Yes.
Angela's voice could be heard all the way from California.
Oh, wow.
That is what I call range. Thank you Angela, for that beautiful song and reminder. Lavinia, our local songbird, never ceases to move us with her melodious voice. Today was no exception. It was simply amazing. Thank you, Lavinia. Some things are planned, others are divine interventions. I would say Jerry Urso falls into the latter category, along with a bit of help from a human intervention, Marsha Phelps. Jerry brought the hostess gift. The picture was truly a gift of love and a bit of Black history as well, I might add. Thank you, Jerry. Next, Cedric, our music director, will play the music, Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by composer and Jacksonville native son, James Weldon Johnson. Let me tell you, we are so deeply appreciative of the Men's Club, members of St. Gabriel Episcopal Church, platform presenters, wow, 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 and guests. The racial diversity in the audience is to be applauded. Thanks to our sisters and brothers of another color. Without you, there would be no Black History program here this afternoon. Last but not least, I am so thankful to the other committee members who were the perfect people for putting this program together. Gloria Belton, Aurelia Donaldson, Lavinia Exon, and Wendy Truitt Smith. In closing, I would like you to take away the words of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teachings and biography and history. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
As we phase out, please stay and enjoy a musical selection. And we will not come back to talk after that.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know why.
And while she is doing that, this is for meditative purposes, meditation purposes. We are not going to stand and sing, lift every voice and sing, because it'll all be coming in at one time and not in harmony the way. So we're just going to sit, enjoy, and meditate on the beautiful music.
Stop. No, it stopped. I'm sorry.
Technical
This one I couldn't get in. I am so sorry.
We're still learning our way around Zoom. I think we've done well today that no one froze while talking. So you're doing great, Aurelia. A round of applause for Aurelia, working out our audio and visual stuff. So we're impressed. No complaints.
All righty. I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Everyone.
There you go again.
Thank
Very
you,
good.
everyone.
This was very good. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We did
Thank you
too.
all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Wendy and the committee.
Thank you. I look forward to meeting you in person, Rodney, and seeing you again, Troy. And I'll
Good job, everyone. Good job,
Great
everyone.
job, Episcopal
Yeah.
Church women.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, Troy, good seeing you, man.
Finally good
Great
to
job,
meet
great
you, Rodney.
Uh-huh.
Who's that?
Terry, you did a great job. I learned so much today. You look beautiful, royalty yourself.
Beautiful.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Jerry, it was so good meeting you.
job,
Thank you so much
Terry.
for sharing.
So as soon as things get better, we would like to come and physically bring you these photographs framed for you for your church prosperity.
That would be wonderful. I know, we're excited.
Okay,
So we'll
thanks.
be in touch. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Miss
Very
Marcia,
good
it was
job,
a
St.
pleasure.
Philip's.
Thank you so very, very much.
St. Francis?
Keep on, you know,
No, St. Philip's.
continue to carry on.
I'm on.